Welcome, everyone, to a brand new and very special episode of the JMSD podcast where we spin the jams and spill the tea, and occasionally we talk about things that aren't new releases or record clubs or things that we normally do. We're taking time out of our week to give you a special episode where we talk about a pretty well-worn musical subject. I think maybe when one thinks of just sort of subcategories for topics of discussion like this, the idea of the breakup song or the breakup album is one that I think many participate in and trade notes about. So naturally, we decided that if we should weigh in with some of our picks.
Well, also, like, we celebrate a lot of indie rock and singer-songwriter music on our main show and on our Record Club series. Indeed. One of the tried and true staples of being in an indie rock band or being a singer-songwriter, not that it's exclusive to those two things, but it often is a kind of cliche thing in both of those categories, is the breakup song. It's kind of like you haven't really arrived, I think, until you've written like a great breakup song as an indie artist of some description. The history of the breakup song goes as far back as pop music does itself, even beyond into blues music, into ancient forms of music, the idea of heartache, the idea of loneliness, particularly the idea of betrayal that comes often with the breakup song, and or the idea of coming to terms with, a sudden, or maybe not sudden, but kind of damage, just awful, devastating emotional change in your life. It is fodder for so many great songs. And the breakup song is a kind of song that I think a lot of music nerds or people getting into music respond to innately, because there's something particularly immediate about a breakup song, even if you haven't experienced the kind of breakup or the kind of experience sitting out in the song. There's something primal and almost universal about the feeling that you get from a good breakup song. And so there's lots of classics. We're going to be celebrating today some picks that are maybe less standards and more kind of picks that are maybe attuned to our personal
like our
tastes.
guitar solos video, we kind of went out of our way to ignore some of the bigger, more staple, more well-worn kind of picks that people might usually tread towards, as well as we kind of aired away from some things that we specifically have like talked about in the past, like albums or bands and stuff that we've already spoken on. We kind of wanted to talk about some newer stuff, but yeah, that's sort of just what we had in mind when doing this.
Yeah, so there's a couple of what I would say are more or less classic songs in this list, but the vast majority of it is stuff that's more attuned to our taste that you're probably not going to typically find on most lists of great breakup songs online. That said, before we get started, as Jake alluded to, we elected not to include songs that were on records or by artists that we've talked about a lot in the past. So we have relegated some of our favorite picks to an honorable mentions section.
Maybe you know that it's been too long.
Say it to your face, but I won't be around anymore.
Let's get into our official list then, now that our honorable mentions are out of the way. And our number one pick is Jake's first selection. Jake, what is your first pick for greatest breakup songs?
I remember a girl so very well.
The three of us, we're very oriented around bands and artists who write breakup songs. And I think maybe one of the masters of the art of writing about heartbreak and tragedy is, of course, Nick Cave. And there is no shortage of picks you can go for through any era of his music, but I had to honestly, very stereotypically go to the Breakup album from his discography, which of course is The Boatman's Call. And I want to go with the quite underrated song that I just don't see talked about a whole lot, which is Where Do We Go Now But Nowhere. This has always been one of my favorite songs on this particular track for a plethora of reasons, but I think maybe this is one of Nick's best pure storytelling songs, just because this is an album that is famous for the fact that it was born out of the dissolution of the relationship of Nick Cave and PJ Harvey. So you can kind of feel the more personal edge in Nick's songwriting all throughout this album. And it's still cloaked in a whole lot of like mythic metaphor, but it doesn't ever lose anything for that. And I think the most explicitly story-driven track in here is Where Do We Go Now But Nowhere. It is really the chronicling of the beginning of a relationship and then getting to the point where it's not even that there's like a description of something that's like heartbreaking or sad. It's really like, it's one of the ideas with a breakup song that I find the most potently sad is where it just kind of seems like the only option that the two people involved in the relationship have left is for them to fall apart. It has no real, inciting incident for the breakup here. It's really just that they kind of run out of steam, and it just becomes all the more tragic that the relationship that obviously brought them so much joy that Nick, does a great job at chronicling towards the beginning of the song, but really that it just sort of ends for no reason. Musically, it's not as, post-punky or harsh as anything he had been making in the 90s up until that point, or really anything that he had made. This was a really sort of stark departure.
It's like Nick has a way of writing about breakups where he's essentially like really immersing you in the breakup as a situation that has life or death significance for him, but he does it like in a way that somehow manages to avoid feeling overwrought. What I'm getting across by this is that my interpretation of the song used to be, or at least it was originally, I thought this song was about an ex-lover who had died of a heroin overdose, because there's lots of allusions to drug paraphernalia and addiction itself loosely throughout the song. And there's this weird way in which he kind of talks about the subject of the song that I feel like there's a level of ambiguity as to their state in his life and maybe just in general. But I think that Nick is deliberate with that. And I think that my initial reading of it through that lens reflects Nick's melodramatic sentiment here and the way in which he views this relationship as having affected him and maybe having affected her as well, in a way not unlike an addiction where it was bound to have a kind of fiery and tragic end. And the lines that Nick blurs between addiction and relationships throughout the Boatman's Call, but particularly on this song, I think, make it feel particularly ugly and kind of hopeless. Morgan, what's your first pick for our list of best breakup songs?
My first pick is Gin Blossom's hit song Found Out About You from their hit album 1992's New Miserable Experience. The reason I picked this song, beyond it being just one of my favorites ever, I think probably I would say Motorcycle Drive-By is my favorite breakup song, full stop, and then this is probably a close second. But the reason I picked this one is that it so perfectly portrays a certain youthful angst about a very bitter and unpleasant uncoupling. But it does that while still sounding mature and not overwrought or childish. Each of my picks sort of represents a certain perspective on a breakup, and they all sort of embrace different perspectives. And this one is definitely the more youthful, embittered, driving past your ex-lover's house in the middle of the night and seeing that their new lover is with them, which is literally a lyric on the song, "Boyfriend's over, I watch the lights go out."
I'm glad you picked a song that kind of represents the perspective of being a teenager, because it's something that maybe isn't covered as much in the breakup song trope, or if it is, it's kind of dismissed or viewed as a little bit more sort of childish or less kind of serious. But this song, I think, gives a voice to that experience and that feeling that's really potent. And it kind of says a lot about the particular brand of cruelty that kids and teenagers are prone to, where you find out about these kinds of things through secondhand sources. Like, it's a song essentially that is as much about cowardice as it is about betrayal, basically, because the person who's singing the song is feeling as though they're not even worth being told to their face, essentially, or being sat down and having a conversation about the fact that the relationship isn't working, right? It's a song that really gets at something that feels like a super modern experience of breakups in the era of, like, digital relationships and ghosting, all that sort of thing. That idea of just kind of like being in the dark. My favorite line in the song, just because it has a particular kind of spite and pettiness to it that feels so teenage, which is there a line I could write that's sad enough to make you cry?
Oh, it's so good.
Oh, fuck.
Like that's my favorite part of the song, for sure, because it's just so, like, bitter in a way that is, like, kind of meta, but also just, it's the kind of bitter you are when you're fucking 16 and you've been fucked over.
It's exactly the kind of song that I'm glad I didn't end up picking The Boy Who Blocked His Own Shot by Brand New, because this captures that exact kind of, like, genuinely sad and reflective self-loathing, but also just terrifically embittered spite. Like, there's a line in that song called, like, when I sneak into your bed to pour salt in your wounds. Like, that's the exact line that I thought of when I heard that particular one, where I was just like, this captures just such a very potent, like, it also captures the sense of, like, when you learn about something that's, like, heartbreaking in a really mundane way, like, oh, you just heard it from them talking at the schoolyard and you're just like, oh wow, now my life's different. Fuck.
Oh yeah, just somebody dropping some heavy hitter shit on you when you're 17 years old, and now you have to get on the bus and go to school. Like, I just have to do my day now.
Oh.
All right, so my first pick is the Sleater-Kinney song "One More Hour" from their 1997 album "Dig Me Out." This is a song that I picked for a number of different reasons, above and beyond just the fact that I think it's an amazing song, perfectly constructed and really powerful. One of the things that was feeding into the song was that the band, which was composed of Corin Tucker, Carrie Brownstein, and Janet Weiss, an all-female rock band, and there was a spin profile that was published on them in the wake of Call the Doctor, and they were kind of starting to get exposure and blow up. And this spin profile revealed, without the consent of either party involved, that co-front women Corin Tucker and Carrie Brownstein had been in a romantic relationship with each other that had ended in a less than desirable fashion, I suppose. And essentially this very personal detail that the band were not planning on revealing, because of course they wouldn't want something like that to dictate the narrative of the band or overshadow the music, suddenly became this one thing that a band that were just blowing up were suddenly known for. And so One More Hour is an attempt to recontrol the narrative, to kind of write a definitive statement on the event, on the relationship itself. The song's written from the perspective of Corin, who sings it as well, who's the lead singer. It's also kind of it's a fuck you that's just directed in so many different directions, mostly outward, but also partially inward too. It's a song that feels so angry. It's a song that feels so confused. It's a song that feels so hurt. And the additional meta layer of Brownstein being in a relationship with Corin, and that essentially being the focus of the song, and then Brownstein kind of singing in the song backup vocals where she kind of mockingly teases Corin, essentially, and pushes back at her emotions. How does it feel to let it go? How does it feel to say goodbye? And they're kind of just shit-talking each other for the whole song, essentially. And
real Fleetwood Mac shit.
Corin just has this amazing voice. I've always loved it, where she's able to sound like in equal parts just genuinely hurt and broken and just furious. Like, she has this just wail that she's able to capture, this genuine vulnerability. And it is the absolute defining aspect of the song. It has a great interlocking groove from Janet and Carrie that the band are kind of known for, having those kinds of grooves, but the vocals are really the big star of the show here too.
Really, the biggest compliment I can throw this is that it is as instrumentally potent as it is emotionally potent, which I think is the, like, at this point in their career, the sort of Sleater-Kinney kind of ethos, in that, you know, you kind of need something that, like with my Nick Cave pick, you kind of have something that sort of feels holistic, because you have something that's lyrically quite acidic and instrumentally quite, you know, melancholic and plaintive. Whereas this, you kind of have these tones that are met through instrumentals and vocals, and it sort of just makes the experience feel kind of properly violent in a way that not a lot of breakup songs are. So not only is this like a potent pick, it's also just a really unique one in that respect. And for that, I really like it.
Yeah, I guess like the main groove almost feels like it's clashing, like the guitar and the drums are kind of clashing into each other. It's a very sort of rigid sort of post-punky groove, and it feels like it, you know, gives you a immediately from the jump a kind of musical representation of the sort of friction that the song's about. Let's move into, Jake, your second pick on the list, which is
this is a pick that, like the Boatman's Call, is on here half because it is a great breakup song and half because it is from a great breakup album, one of which I have mentioned several times in the past as being one that I find particularly emotionally volatile, that being Lingua Ignota's 2019 album Caligula, the song Do You Doubt Me, Traitor? And I'll definitely be the first to admit this is definitely the most musically out there thing on this list. This is certainly a departure from how most breakup songs are. And that's kind of why I picked it. I wanted to go with something that was a bit more traditional with Nick Cave, and then go for something a little bit more left field here, but because it does capture something very, very specific about the experience, and that being just sort of emotional laceration. There's, you know, the depicting the story of an inevitable tragic heartbreak is a tale as old as time. And then there is the art of doing something a little bit different, which is something that's a bit more of a balancing act, and having to sort of accurately relay the dynamic of an emotionally abusive relationship, and doing so kind of without being sort of monotone or just, you know, oh, hey, this person was bad to me and I felt like shit, which, you know, that can totally work if you're a good enough songwriter or the band behind you is good enough at, you know, writing their grooves as you are writing your lyrics. But I feel like it takes a certain art to make a song this multifaceted and make it so that it's both not vague and specific to enough to the point where it feels like it's from an experience. And a lot of the power of this song is in Kristen Hayter's incredible vocal performance. I mean, the instrumental backing of this is very much fits solidly into the overall narrative arc of Caligula, which makes this a little bit more difficult to talk about just because I feel like all of the songs here really inform each other. So sort of taking one out of context does kind of rob it just a tiny itty bitty bit, but there's nothing in the world that's going to take the power away from the segment of this song where Kristen is absolutely wailing, I don't eat, I don't sleep, I don't eat, I don't sleep, I let it consume me. And then at the end, she's just so like overwhelmed with spite and anger for the person that hurt her. She just going, you know, how do I break you before you break me? Just, and with this, how the song starts too, it's sort of how can you doubt me now? It's kind of a depiction of gaslighting. But one of the cool things about Caligula is that you can't ever really tell when the lyrics are being spoken from the point of view of a different character. Lingua Ignota is a project that very much blends a lot of ideas of obedience and subservience in the ideas of like God and religion, but also with the ideas of a sort of abusive power dynamic. And in this dynamic, I feel like she really thoroughly explores the idea of a sort of mutual toxicity that is at its most potent when she is sort of backing away on the details and voice of which, because it makes it feel a little bit more real. Like this is a song that essentially feels like it's from both the perspective of the abuser and the abused, but at no point can you really tell at which who is speaking, but you still get that idea. And it's written in such a way that these ideas are like mutually exclusive, but only in their specific respective context. Like the "I don't eat, I don't sleep" lines, those could be lines being spoken by the abuser in an attempt to sort of undermine the abused. And each time you listen to this, it sort of unravels a new layer about what it can mean and how it can feel. But I think the real appeal of this song to me is really just how raw it is. I listened to this album very sparsely, purely because of songs like "Do You Doubt Me, Traitor," because it is really, really genuinely difficult to listen to. I mean, like, her screaming on this song alone is very difficult to process, just because, I mean, her vocals are literally like clipping in the mix like throughout half of this song in a way that they aren't on something like "Sinner Get Ready," which is a much more restrained and focused project, whereas Caligula feels like this primal outburst that is at its most tempestuous on a song like "Do You Doubt Me, Traitor."
I mean, obviously, I think it's a song about a violent relationship and about having pain inflicted on you and even being tortured to a certain extent. And that absolutely makes it a song that captures a very specific demographic of breakup song that is important to represent here, I think, because sometimes the wake of a relationship can be trivial, and it can be a petty betrayal that leaves you angry and pissed off, but ultimately that, you know, you have to grow up and move on from, like in the Gin Blossom song. Or it can be, you can be left in the wake of something that is scarring and going to affect you for the rest of your life. And "Do You Doubt Me, Traitor" is what it sounds like to realize how affected you are, and to, I guess, dedicate yourself mentally to nothing but exacting that pain back outward where it came from.
I think the only thing I have to add is that I think the song is very successful, and as such, I would never like to hear it again for the rest of my life.
Morgan, what is your second pick for our list today?
For my second pick, I went with "Better Homes and Gardens" by Taking Back Sunday. I feel like everybody kind of forgot about Taking Back Sunday after Louder Now, and considering the two albums that follow Louder Now before their sort of hiatus, it's easy to understand why. But with 2014's "Happiness Is," the band took a big old step in the right direction. That album's pretty much nothing but heat, if you ask me. And a particular highlight from it is "Better Homes and Gardens," which is, they're not reinventing the wheel or anything here, but what it is a very immersive, genuine portrayal of divorce. And the title of the song itself is an allusion to the idea that when you marry someone and you start a family and you suddenly want to break that apart, it's so much more all-encompassing than a breakup. There's something that you've built together, and that now has to go away.
It's a very special song that I'm glad you put on this list for a few different reasons. One, you've already mentioned, like, it's a song about the dissolution of a marriage. which, you know, is, I think, a minority of breakup songs, because most of them tend to be more about these relationships that kind of burn out, I suppose, rather than have become sort of these sort of stale, like, loveless marriages and that sort of thing. But even the songs that are written about marriages don't, I think, tend to invoke the images of marriage and the symbols of marriage as just blatantly as this one does, with the regular refrain of when you took your ring off, I sat there stunned, parked out in my car. That whole setting that you're immediately thrown into of, you know, obviously something has boiled over and some kind of straw has broken the camel's back in this very sort of mundane and unexpected location. It's just kind of all come to a head. I love the lyric that the courage that must have took left me utterly speechless, because it's like, in that moment, despite this person essentially putting the final nail in the coffin of this thing you've built together, you still can't help but have admiration for them. And that, I think, there's so much in that speaks to what it is like to be in a relationship for a very long time, where you know someone so well that if they were to do something out of character like that, or like with that would take that level of bravery for them personally, even if it's utterly devastating to you, you can't help but feel this weird twinge of pride. In that moment, you were perfect, and it made all the bullshit seem worth it. It's a song with a great take on the scenario, and it's kind of full of the sort of pop punk trappings. Like when it gets into the "you'll never be happy, it was all for nothing" sort of stuff, it kind of, you know, it leans into that typical sort of cynical treatment of these kinds of subject matters, which is fine.
Well, I also think those are reframed by the song, and it really suits the progression of the band itself, when they were saying the same kind of things on albums like Tell All Your Friends and Louder Now. It's totally recontextualized by this thing that has a lot more consequence. Like the line, my parents are home and so is my kid. There's a lot there that's like, so is my kid, not our kid. So it's like, are they claiming ownership over the child now?
Yeah.
Or like, you know, is it a stepchild? He does a little without saying a lot in a lot of cases here.
My second pick for this list is probably the most devastating of my three picks. It actually shares a few things in common with Jake's Lingua Ignota pick, I think, because it's about a relationship that's kind of in the process of falling apart, and where there is a suggestion of mutual destruction and even violence. The song is by the Afghan Whigs. It's called When We Two Parted, from their album Gentleman, and it's a song essentially about a relationship that is unquestionably thoroughly without love or affection of any kind, where it is based around sort of transactional and mechanical acts of sex and of company. And it's a song where there is nothing but resentment between the two parties involved. But of course, as is the case with a lot of Afghan Wiz songs, it's kind of presented from one side in a way where you feel like you have a particularly biased picture of what's going on. It's not even like the trope of like, I wish you would speak to me, or I wish that you would connect to me. It's not even that. It's, I wish I could hear you scream. The thing I think that makes it unique on this list is it's a breakup song, unquestionably. It's a song about the realization and the kind of bitterness of realizing that something you have, I guess, embarked on with someone has absolutely curdled into nothingness. But it's also a song about feeling as though you are kind of destined to suffer together, and that you can't really ever escape it anyway. And that's something that I don't feel most, if not any of the other songs on this list really capture, is this feeling when you're in a mutually destructive relationship that leaving isn't an option. Whether you're primarily being hurt or doing the hurting, that this is just the way it's meant to be, and that what we deserve is to suffer with and because of each other. And maybe that's a little bit too dark, but then again, Jake picked Do You Doubt Me, Traitor, so I don't feel so bad about picking a song this dark.
Nah. I feel like the instrumentation itself communicates so much in the song. The very particular way it sounds and is recorded, shit hurted, but with guitars. Is it I Wish I Could Hear You Scream?
If I could only hear you scream, I think is what it is.
Yeah. That line in particular really jumped out at me. It's just like, I wish I could elicit anything from you. It's just such a simple and elegant way to get that feeling across. I feel like that line in particular can also apply to like unrequited love as well, where you sort of only end up watching someone from a distance. And you're like, I wish you were in love with me and you won't even look at me because you don't know I'm there. So I just want some sort of closeness to you that I don't have.
There's this theme of violence in the song that I think comes through and makes it just particularly uncomfortable. And this is the thing, and other people might not have this particular taste, but I kind of like it when songs about emotional topics kind of make you uncomfortable or almost challenge your notion of how the topic should be or conventionally is discussed. I mean, this is true for the whole album the song is on, by the way, which is a fucking ride in terms of like mental pain. But the line, if I inflict the pain, then baby, only I can comfort you. That shit is like, that sent me to next week. Like I was, that shit like just put me out. Every time I listen to it, that line just completely ruins me. And yeah, there's this thing like with the Lingua Ignota song of like the ambiguity of perspective, the notion of abuse being used not only as a means of maintaining power, but also a means of forcing something out of someone that makes the relationship worth it, even if it only ultimately causes more pain. There's lyrics here that refer to like, dressing up and playing the assassin and playing the victim. This idea that in order to feel any kind of fulfillment in this dynamic, these two people have to sort of assign certain roles to themselves, a submissive role and a dominant role, and kind of just clash into each other. And it's a really fucked up song. Digging ourselves up only a tiny bit from that pit with the next pick. Jake, your third pick for this list.
This is certainly the simplest lyrically of my choices, but yet again, this is from a quintessential breakup album that is the sort of moment on the narrative spiral of this album where all is completely laid bare in a sort of just projection of emotional depression, essentially. And that is on the album Spiritualized. Ladies and gentlemen, we are floating in space. And the song is, of course, if you are familiar with the album, no surprise here, this is Broken Heart. And this is maybe like the simplest song on here, not just on this album, but maybe on this like video as a whole, because it's basically the lead vocalist kind of intoning, I have a broken heart, over and over again in not so many words. But I think what makes this song so effective and what makes me pick it is the emotional simplicity of just a song being sad, but also the fact that this is the biggest sad that you will ever possibly get from a song like this. The progression here, instrumentally, is kind of genius. The build here, I mean, it just starts with these really quiet, kind of muted, subtle organ tones, and then you make it 4 minutes into this song and you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe we started there. Because you're at this point where there's basically a full symphony orchestra playing. There are strings, there are horns, there are everything. This is the most potent sounding sad song that could ever be made in a genre like this at this particular time. And it's so incredibly potent at making you feel this. Like, trust me, when you feel like shit and you go through a breakup and you listen to this, there is nothing that hits quite like this, just because it has a sense of clarity. Man, by the time the horns come in about 4 minutes in, you're going to be gone. You're going to be sobbing. Trust me. It's just one of those really effective moments that feels almost just as effective in the narrative arc of the record as it is out of it. Just because once you take it away from that, as an isolated, condensed moment, it still builds just fucking flawlessly.
Yeah, and I want to say as well, like, the thing about this list is I think we all made these picks because they're songs that stand on their own. I think they don't need to be heard in the context of their records. They may be amplified by that context, but they stand as singular statements. And I think this is really true of Broken Heart, which is, even on the album it's on, kind of an island of a song, just kind of stuck between these absolutely cavernous layers of noise on the songs either side of it. And it's just this plaintive string-led ballad. And I mean, the lyrics are only in basically the first half of the song. This is so random and stupid, but a thought I had re-listening to the song this week is that it has the same structure as 9 Inch Nails' Closer, where you have a kind of building first and then the lyrics kind of just finish about halfway through, and then you just have this extenuating musical motif that continues and builds and then finishes in a really quiet place in the very last few seconds. And I couldn't get that comparison out of
both of those albums. Both of those albums are about doing heroin and like dying. So
absolutely,
I mean, there's that, but like
I need the mashup.
The thing about Broken Heart, like my thing about that album, which has been one of my favorite albums for over 10 years now, is that most of the songs in the album have this double layer writing style where they're equally about, a breakup and about a heroin addiction. And you can read them through either lens, right? This is one of the few moments in the song where it is just unambiguously a breakup song. There's the heroine double meanings and layers are kind of melted away here, and it is just about heartache.
I was reminded of like Clint Mansell and his scores for The Fountain and Requiem for a Dream. Sometimes
strings at the end. That's
it's just like, it's just so big, and is like, I'm not sure I've ever heard anything that sounded better in my life.
It's like when you hear On the Nature of Daylight by Max Richter and you're just like,
what I thought of on that note of like, minimalist modern classical is Bibo no Aozora by Ryuichi Sakamoto. It's the same sort of string sort of sound and arrangement as that song. This album was like the first major breakup of my life when I was fucking 15, 16. There were a lot of music I was listening to at that time. This was one of the biggest albums on my rotation, and this song, boy oh boy, if you don't think there were several nights of my life as a teenager where I would just go for a walk around my neighborhood at 3 a.m. and listen to this song, you think way more highly of me than I thought of myself, because that's exactly what I did.
I haven't spent many nights of my 20s listening to this song and just crying and crying.
These tears on my pillow.
Yeah. The recurring notion as well of being too busy to be heartbroken and too busy to be thinking about someone else as well.
That's really what
it's like. There's two sides to that, like, because one part of it is like the way that you deliberately, as a coping mechanism, just distract yourself with things, and the other side of it is like no, but actually you don't have the time to even be sad because you've got so much other shit happening in your life that you can't allow yourself the time to process the trauma or the tragedy. And that's real.
There's nothing worse than in songs like this than when like it'll just have a random throwaway lyric where it's like I can trace it back to when I first heard one of the singles for the posthumous Mac Miller album Circles, and it's that part where you hear I'm tired of being so tired, and you're just like, my entire life is fucking ruined. Like anytime that's a subject brought up in heartbreak where it's just like I'm too tired to feel like this, I'm just like, that's just where I just put a gun in my mouth. Fuck.
Morgan, what is your final pick for our video today?
I wanted to have at least one pick on this episode that sort of embraces the pop breakup song. And so for that, I went with Adele's When We Were Young. In so many ways, it's the kind of song that Adele has written about 1,000 times by this point. But honestly, I think this might be the best one she ever wrote. It's all of the potent, overwrought emotion pouring out of one of the most powerful voices in the world in a way that is almost to be expected by this point, but it just bulldozes me. I also think it takes a really interesting perspective of, oh God, I am still so in love with this person, and everything is so different now than it used to be that it would never make sense for us to be back together, but my God, do I wish it did. And boy, if you haven't felt that, you're not old enough, because you will.
Morgan, I'm so glad that you put this an Adele song, really, but this song on this list, because Adele's 25 is probably one of the really, it's not a great record, I don't think, but I think it is one of the great pop breakup records of the 2010s. I think it's probably my favorite Adele album by a small margin. And it really does begin with a string of amazing songs that kind of climaxes with this particular track, which is probably the best song on the album. It is a song that's definitely been played a lot on the radio, and I've heard it a lot involuntarily throughout my life. But coming back to it this week, I was struck with how kind of creative and beautiful and actually quite original Adele's vocal melodies are here. The way that she takes a very tropey song, one that she's written in the style of a number of times, and it even is a song that evokes a certain set of cliches, but she has a particular way that she approaches this character of this song, and just the way that she composes it as well, that make it feel like a fresh take on a subject that is well worn. And I don't know, maybe I would agree that it's her best breakup song. She does have so many great ones. Certainly it feels like, you know, her most enduring will always be Someone Like You, just because that is so ubiquitous now as a standard in this genre. But I really like that you picked this instead, because it's slightly maybe overshadowed by how much she kind of perfected the idea of the Adele breakup song with Someone Like You, but it has this complicated emotional sensibility to it that Someone Like You has to a certain extent as well, but that feels more wizened here and perhaps more interesting as a result of that. It's less the kind of, you know, young person's longing that you get in so many breakup songs, and more a kind of perspective that is a little bit more understanding and able to deal with the dissonance that comes with processing your emotions in the wake of a breakup. I don't know, it really hit listening to it this week, and I think it is one of her best songs. And I think that anyone who overlooks it in a discussion of great breakup songs is doing themselves a disservice, because it truly feels like a standard of the genre that Adele has perfected. For the last pick today, my third selection.
Well,
And I saved this one for last because in many ways it's the most deconstructed and minimal song on this list, and one of the most recognizable and well-known, I would say. So it's nice to finish with a couple of ones that people will recognize. And my pick is Imogen Heap's song Hide and Seek, which has very much had a kind of arrested development in terms of its ascension to the status of great songs. It can be found in the center of her masterpiece, 2005, Speak for Yourself. And it's notable for being a song, a stunning album, one of my favorite records of its kind. And it's notable for being a song that is entirely absent of instrumentation besides Imogen's own voice, which is slathered in a kind of like vocoder tone, I think. And it's just this sort of a cappella performance of her very synthesized voice. And what's interesting about this song as well is that it's not a breakup song in the same sense as any of the other songs that we've talked about on this list, because the song is actually written about a divorce from the perspective of the child that is kind of caught in the middle. So this is the kind of the sole song on this list. It's kind of a secondhand breakup song in a certain sense. It's about how a child who is caught in the crosshairs of a breakup expresses their feelings in that sensibility. And the choice of vocoder, I think, is made even more meaningful because it kind of gives Imogen's voice an alien quality that I feel like makes it easier to see the song from a child's perspective. The range that she displays in the song, the places she goes with her voice, the little snatches of melody that she finds and then dances away from, it is truly a formless song and lyrically just completely devastating in a lot of ways that hit home. And even though it is a song about divorce from the perspective of a child, canonically, it also does work, I think, if you want to read it as a straightforward breakup song as well. I think it works on that level too, which is why it's probably my favorite pick, actually, of my three that I've put here. And I think the best that encapsulates the complexities of how that genre, I suppose, or that kind of trope can be used and can be brought to life in music.
For the average listener, it's difficult to sort of dispel it from its meme status somewhat, but once you're able to do that, you really, really get the sense that it's just like, you're kind of mystified that this song even exists in the first place, just because it has such a really specific emotional tone to it that I can't think of another song that makes me feel this weird level of melancholy with its very kind of uncomfortable minimalism. It makes you like wreck it with its subject material because there's just nothing else but her voice, and you feel kind of trapped in it just because it's simultaneously very encompassing.
There's something like the way it starts with just the where are we, what the hell is going on? You're just completely disoriented both with what it sounds like and the lyrics itself. You have no sense of context. And the little information that is kind of dribbled through the song just paints such a really devastating and subtle picture. Like the chorus of Hide and Seek, trains and sewing machines, like these kind of images, this idea, these images that evoke childhood. And the line that is, I think, one of the most devastating lines I've ever heard in a breakup song, all those years, they were here first. Like this idea of an end coming to a relationship being so unfathomable to a child that they can only be like, this isn't fair. The good times were here first. It's not fair for them to be taken away and overtaken. And that sense of childlike confusion and naivety over the nature of like adult relationships, it reminds me in some ways of Steven Spielberg's AI, which is, I think, a movie that approaches the subject of how a kind of naive mind fails to comprehend adult emotions and realities. And yeah, and I think that movie and this song exist in that same sort of space of a particular type of art that captures a particular type of thing. And One More Hour makes me sad and angry for Corin. And When We Two Parted makes me just feel like total shit. But this is the one that makes me cry. This is the one that really makes me fucking sad.
This also this you're gonna roll your eyes, but like all with the way you were describing like the perspective and like and even some of the sounds that it explores, it shit sounds like it would be on Deadwing. Like this reminds me of Glass Arm Shattering. Like, I mean, tell me I'm wrong.
No, it's just, you're not wrong. It's just like the
When you said Steven, I was like, oh my god.
I have to grow my brain here for a second.
Like, what's the most possible like Jake stereotypical thing?
I thought it was going to be Phoebe Bridgers.
Right, yeah. Well, there we go. It's the other one. Yeah. Anyway, that's our list of our 3 each of our favorite breakup songs. You can find a playlist to all the songs we mentioned today. Will be in the description below, so you can go and check them out and listen to them yourselves. Let us know in the comments at home, what are your favorite breakup songs as well? What do you think of our picks? Are these songs that mean something to you, or are they songs that you're just hearing for the first time or maybe haven't yet heard at all? Go and check them out, and please leave us a comment with your favorite personal breakup songs as well, because we are utter masochists and we will listen to all of them.
You can't get worse than the Lingua Ignota song. You can't. So
just like that's calling Do You Doubt Me Traitor a breakup song is like calling 9/11 a building demolition. As always though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, American Express, don't live life without it.